banks collapsing, US dollars under attack, looming recession, the BRICS nations, for people that haven't heard that acronym before, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are getting together. And I know this has been going on for quite some time. What is going on? How do we step back and think about this moment?
I'm so eager to pass along an understanding of the mechanics so people themselves can do the analysis. Two things are going on. First of all, they're holding all of this dollars, and the stuff that we talked about is going on. And then also there's the weaponization through sanctions. And so sanctions means you freeze other assets, you freeze assets. Those assets are the bonds. And that happened with Russia, and there are threats of it with other countries, China, and so on. And there's kind of the thinking, well, if I hold the bonds, can that happen to me? And then why am I transacting in this other third currency rather than transacting directly? So, for example, the United States share of world trade has declined and China's share of world trade has increased to become greater. So if two countries are trading, what do they go to the dollars in order to do that? Then the usefulness of the dollar as a storehold of wealth changes. I look at three major forces that are happening now, and those three major forces are the creation of a lot of debt and the printing of a lot of money to buy that debt, and then that gets people bad returns. It produces a higher amount of inflation. The second force is the internal conflict, the amount of conflict that's internally, largely due to the largest wealth gaps that we've had since the 30s. That produces populism of the left and the right, particularly when there are financial difficulties. The third force is the rise of a great power, the geopolitical force that's going on, that we're seeing today with China and Russia and so on, and how that's changing. So we have that dynamic taking place. Holding cash and dead assets is a bad thing. If you have bad financial conditions, as measured by if you're spending a lot more than you're earning, and you don't have a lot of savings, you have more debt or liabilities than savings, you're not in a good financial position. That's a fact. And if you have a downturn, if the country as a whole experiences that problem, and you have a large wealth gap, you are likely to have a fight. So I think there are three big forces to keep your eye on. And when you see them in their cycle, then it's clear. First, are you earning more than you are spending? One man's debts are another man's assets. And when somebody is holding those assets and they're producing a lot more of that money in debt, they go down in value. Money goes down in value as they produce it to produce that buying power. And then that gets people bad returns. It produces a higher amount of inflation, and it produces bad returns for holding debt or bond. So in other words, cash or bonds, and then people get out of cash and bonds, and that produces rising interest rates while there's rising inflation. The second force, are you operating cohesively, common mission, and moving in the right direction? The system working? Or are you at each other's throats? Is the system threatened? It's a risky situation because it produces disorder, and it can produce a form of civil war. And that is the internal piece. And the third force is the rise of a great power, the geopolitical force that's going on, that we're seeing today with China and Russia and so on, and how that's changing. Because when the power of a country diminishes, okay? When we get weaker financially, or how we are with each other, and so on, there are greater vulnerabilities. And there's always the competitive power that learns how to become stronger. And competition always happens. There's the establishment, and then there's the new competition. And as they get stronger in all ways, militarily and commercially, and so on. And that's the dynamic that we're seeing. A lot of money is in cash because people think that cash is the safest investment. But think about it. It's lost, as of the most recent statistics, 8.5% over the last, inflation is 8.5%, and they receive virtually no interest rate in cash. And so there was an 8.5% loss of buying power as a result of inflation. And so psychology should change, and is in the process of changing, to realize that you have to think in terms of buying power, not the number of dollars you have. The next thing is to have a diversified portfolio of assets. The diversification means some assets that are inflation hedge prone. For example, you're better off to own an inflation index bond than a regular bond. I think that you have to understand what a good strategic asset allocation mix is. That is, how to create a good, well-diversified portfolio, assuming that you don't know how to make these buy and sell decisions, because diversification can reduce your risk without reducing your return. If you understand how to get equally attractive investments that are not correlated with each other, that diversify each other, you can build a diversified portfolio. I would not want to be in debt or cash and those instruments. I would want to diversify well with a bias toward inflation protected assets. And I would want to diversify between locations, countries, in terms of the investment based on the criteria I just mentioned.